Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am very excited today to be sitting down to speak with Kinga Philipps. For any of my listeners who might not know who she is an award-winning journalist, writer, producer, and fellow at the Explorers Club, and also an adventure travel writer and environmental advocate. I am so excited to bring your journey to the show today. So welcome.
Thank you. You forgot to add she's also covered in poison oak. That's why she's wearing long sleeves.
Oh, that sounds exceptional. That's when you know you're an adventurer, is when you show up for an interview covered in poison oak.
Yeah. There's some right here and some right here too. You can't see that. It's covered.
Oh no. Well, maybe we'll have to explore that later on in the show to figure out what happened to make
I'll
that
let you
happen.
know.
Um, so I wanted to begin the conversation, Kinga, just giving you a moment to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, kind of in the world of travel, and then we'll go forward from there.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. And I would say that I am a jack of all trades, master of none, and also one of the luckiest people alive because I, for 22 years, have really had the opportunity and the honor to work for networks like National Geographic and Discovery and Travel Channel and BBC and Epix and now with Hearst Media to do shows that are inspiring, awesome, travel oriented, history oriented, really all the stuff that I wanted to do as a kid. So my 10-year-old self is like, "Oh, yay, we get to do this." So
Mhm.
that is my journey, and that really stemmed from my parents and who they were. My dad, a geologist, and when we moved from Poland to Oklahoma, we were big adventurers and explorers and road trippers, and that just always stuck with me.
Yeah. I love that you said that because I feel like why I love watching you is I feel like my 10-year-old self actually who wished I could be Indiana Jones and be an archaeologist and explore and like go live with tribal villages and all that stuff. Like she also sees that and is like, yes, like people get to do that. That's what I love watching. And the other part of that is I have three daughters and I love that you like show them that they can do that. I think when I was young, you didn't really see anyone who was a woman that was doing all of these things, so that you knew it was possible. So I love that you kind of have been able to step up, I guess, whether you meant to or not, to be that inspiration to people that would wish that they could live those kind of dreams.
Well, I love that you have three daughters, and I love that they have that kind of an opportunity ahead of them. Because, like you said, even when I started, I always tell the story, and it's kind of funny now, but whenever I would come in for meetings, people would go, "Well, we're looking for like an Anthony Bourdain or a Laura Croft." And I'm like, "Well, you just gave me a male and a fictional character to go off of." And I quickly realized like there just really weren't that many examples of women in the adventure space, the travel space, the history space. And now you're seeing a lot more of that. And that's super exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely why when I started the podcast, I kind of quickly in my second season started focusing on women because I really did want to show that there are women doing all of these amazing things in the space of travel and adventure and exploration and social impact. And so yeah, I love that. Thank you for stepping in and talking about that with me today. I did want to begin with talking a little bit about, you mentioned your dad is a geologist and your mom was a botanist, and I just wondered, like, how did that shape how you see the world? It seems like they probably were quite literally examining the world as you explored, and how do you think that shows up in who you are now?
I think what you introduce your kids to at a young age sticks with them in more ways that you could ever imagine. And my dad, growing up, was a big adventurer. He would roam across Poland even during the winter with big dogs and sleds full of gear. I mean, stuff that I can't even imagine. I'm like, oh, that's not my Patagonia sleeping bag. Like, they had their sleeping bags made and they were heavy and it was just a whole different world. And then when we came here, when I was 5 years old to the United States from Poland, my parents were both big outdoors people and they just wanted to explore and experience. And so we had this big blue van and like the Kurzwalds from the vacation series, we would go driving around the country and we didn't have a ton of money, which now I look back on and I'm like, it actually made my life that much cooler because we would stay at like Motel Sixes and KOA campgrounds and off the beaten path and we would sleep in the van. And one of the stories that always people love is my dad loved photography. So he would love to document everything. As a geologist, if we were driving and there was some interesting stratification in the rocks, he would make us get out and he would put his hammer next to it for size comparison, take a photo. He did the same thing with roadkill because there are all these animals here that just didn't exist in Poland. So we're driving along and there's a raccoon or a coyote on the side of the road. My dad would be like, pull over. And they'd be like, Kinga, go stand next to it for size comparison. So I have dozens of photos of myself as a kid like this next to like a coyote smashed on the side of the road. And now people look at this and they're like, well, your family was kind of weird. And I'm like, no, they were scientific. They wanted to examine this animal and it's the closest we could come. So lots of great childhood stories.
Yeah, that sounds like that will be the perfect photos to add to a travel memoir someday. Your editor will appreciate it. Um, well, I agree. Like I think what your childhood really does shape, and like these things that we think like that's probably not the thing your parents would think would stick with you all these years later, right? But I love that like those moments really become important and those start to tell the story of who we are and who we become. And like I said with my three girls, like I love seeing the random things that they kind of pick onto, and as it's starting to like stack up and build who they are. I just think that it's really cool to look at it from that perspective. And I love having these conversations to hear people reflect on it and like see how it all comes together, because people's journeys are, for me, just really interesting. Um, when you look back at your career, for me, I love, and you mentioned like you've done all these really kind of unique shows, like you've done sci-fi Legends Quest, and you did the show where you were looking at like artifacts around the globe, and you've also done like you were part of Al Gore's team with Current TV when that launched, like all of these things that are kind of all over the place, but for me, they all have these like really like deep storytelling parts to travel. So it's not just like I'm going to this destination, but you're really digging into something in one way or another. I was just curious, what gets you excited when you learn about a new project, when you're considering what to work on, and how do you figure out the story that you want to tell?
You know, that's a great question, and the answer is pretty simple. I'm really a child at heart, and I'm good at the things that I like, and I'm not good at the things that I don't like. So I've often laughed over the years, like I love nature, I love history, I love travel, I love culture, I love new experiences. So I'm decent at those things. If someone came to me and was like, "We have a show for you," and this has happened, you know, we want to pay you good money to talk about politics, I'd be like, like I'm the worst person you could ever hire. I would fall asleep in the middle of our broadcast now. So I have been so fortunate that my career has really gone in that direction of travel, ocean conservation experiences, you know, cultural insights to different regions. I love the quintessence of regions. I love that. And I love that all the shows that I've done, from Legend Quest and America's Lost Treasures for National Geographic, that we would go in, and even to Finding Adventure that I'm doing now, not only is there awesome storytelling to be had, which I love because my background is journalism, so stories to me are everything. But on top of that, you get to really have the experience of the region, the people, the culture, the food, the topography, everything of the region that we're in. And that is really fun because you've got this epicenter of whatever the core message is of that, be it artifacts or legends or adventure, and then you have all these ripples that go out like a rock thrown into a pond of everything around that really helps you experience that area, and I love that.
Yeah. And I think what is so magical about that is that part of what makes travel so powerful is when you get somewhere and you do start peeling back those layers and you start seeing the interconnectedness of people and planet and place. And I think that's hard to convey sometimes. And I just think when you start telling the story of a destination through all these different perspectives, you can kind of paint that picture in a more rich and real way for those that aren't traveling there. So I love that. And I don't know if you have seen that as well, like seen that come alive in the work that you've done.
Oh, definitely. And one of the beautiful things about travel, be it on or off camera, is that the exotic becomes familiar. And by that, I mean that there's what you said, there's a connection. So you can look at a foreign country or a culture or a religion or a food that seems really different than what you have in your everyday. And then when you go and you immerse yourself in that culture, it becomes part of your world. And it's a lot easier then to connect to people, to connect to their stories, to connect to their passions, to connect to whatever it is. Their religion might be different than yours. That's okay. But suddenly you have this experience and it no longer seems so foreign and exotic. It seems just a part of this amazing world that we live in. And that's what makes this world so colorful.
Yeah, it's definitely like this beautiful like harmonizer and equalizer. Like you really do, I think you fold something right into your own life, and it becomes so much more difficult than to, read a story about a destination and have this separate feeling. You really will come to it through the lens of those conversations you had or a meal shared, and you'll move from that space forward instead of feeling so isolated. And I think that is what is so powerful. So I love that even though some people don't have the privilege or ability to travel, that there is really quality programming that like helps them have that experience and build that connection so that we can continue that movement without actually traveling.
Most definitely.
um, well, you were talking about things that you like and things that you don't like. I would love to learn when you learned that you didn't like or did like sharks. And for people listening, Kinga was the first female host of Shark Week last year, which is super amazing. Another one of those things that I was so excited to tell my daughters, because that really means something to them. Both the first woman to do anything, they have already latched on to that's important because of the way I speak to them. But also Shark Week is epic in the minds of all people, really, I think. But how did that come about? Like, what got you passionate and curious about sharks?
So this is a story that originates when I was very young and probably in ways that other people can relate to. When I was little, I wasn't allowed to watch scary movies. So naturally, I went to my friend's house and watched them there. And one of the movies we watched was Jaws. And to me, as probably to a lot of kids, it was like, well, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen. Like, I'm horrified now. And I went from, oh my gosh, I love swimming, to I'm not taking a bath because there's most likely a giant shark in there. And as we now know from this movie, all they want to do is eat us. So our big adventure as a family, yearly, we would go to Florida. And suddenly I show up and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm not going to go in the water. And my parents couldn't figure out why. And for a long time, I couldn't even figure out why I was so terrified of, clearly, sharks really are not as terrifying. Now we know that, but to this child's brain, they were just everywhere and just waiting to eat me. And then my little brain started to go, well, why am I so afraid? And so I started to research this a little bit more. And I eventually had the opportunity to be in the water with sharks. And that blew my mind because I then realized that everything I had ever been told, what the media was putting out there, even the music that they play whenever a shark appears on camera, as you'll start to notice, is really negative and ominous and very fear-based. And here I am in the water, and I was in a cage the first time, and here are these sharks swimming by, and they don't even care. Like, they're not trying to pry me out of the cage and eat me, which is what basically everything before that would have indicated is exactly what they do. And I thought, holy cow, like this is something that I need to get behind because these animals are real underdogs. And as I started to research and started to connect with organizations that really protect the oceans and sharks, I learned more and more and more and just knew I wanted to fight for these animals. And then becoming a part of Shark Allies with Stephanie Brendel, who is just an incredible mentor of mine and such a force to be reckoned with in the world of shark conservation, I really had the opportunity to spend a lot more time with these animals and really see the effects of what we are doing to them. And then with Shark Week, basically as a TV host and an ocean conservationist, I kind of straddled these two worlds where I also basically went, look at me, look at me, look at me for like 5 years. So they were like, just give her a show already, please. Maybe she'll leave us alone. And working with Ping Pong Productions, who did Lost in the Wild for Travel Channel, we made this phenomenal show. I have to say, I'm so proud of, with Tiger Queen. That is female led, and it's about female sharks, and it is smart and scientific, and working with Dr. Austin Gallagher and actually being the first people to tag tiger sharks in Turks and Caicos. And just the entire experience was marvelous. In the finished product, I am so super proud of. And the messaging is there. You know, we talk about conservation, we talk about these animals, we get in the water with them. Clearly, I'm still here, have all my fingers and toes. No one wants to see my toes right now, but probably also covered in poison oak. But yeah, so the shark space has really propelled me personally, but also professionally in a very passionate way.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that it's really amazing when people kind of go through an experience like that where you have this thing that, and I love that you tried to unpack it as a kid. You're like, no, this fear isn't real. I think it takes people a long time to get to the point where they start to try to understand why they have developed some sort of fear or belief that they have that isn't really founded in reality. But that process then is what kind of moves you to the next level. And so it's just really interesting that it really, like, literally and figuratively moved you through to the next level and created this space. And not only hosting, being the first female host, but also showing women that they can be engaged in science and conservation. They can be explorers, they can use their voice. Like, all of these things, I think, are things that are so important, and that I'm so excited to connect with women like you and the other women I'm talking to just show that this is something that is really important. And while your focus is on sharks, this is also going to give the next person who's really invested in this area the, like, gumption to tackle and get into someone's face so that they can move something else into the next level. So I don't know, I just love that. And I wonder, for you, having been a woman who stepped into so many of these spaces for the first time, or where it's definitely a boys club, what has that been like for you? I know you're also a part of the Explorers Club, and a lot of network television that is male dominated. What has been what has been your experience, and what do you think about the difference from when you started until now and looking forward?
There is a massive difference from when I started 22 years ago. I mean, 22 years ago, kind of like the example I gave you with Anthony Bourdain, who I loved, and Laura Croft, like, that's kind of what was in the female space. And when I first came to Los Angeles as a TV host, a journalist, it was very much like, here you go to the red carpet. Here you go. You can do these things. And I was like, no, that's kind of boring. I don't really like this. Like, it's great for some people, fashion and all of that stuff. Like, that's definitely a niche for people, and that's wonderful. But it wasn't what I liked. And I kind of had to push to be in the adventure space, the travel space, the ocean conservation space. And the funny thing is that when you start to see more of these women on camera, which you do now, which is wonderful, you start to think there are more of us out there. And the reality is, there always were. They just really weren't given a platform. And even in the projects that I've had the opportunity to do, I've met so many amazing women around the world. And there was a period of time where I was doing a lot of writing, and I was writing for Inside Hook, and there was a series called The Real Life Laura Crofts. And that came out of the comment I made earlier, that I was always like, oh, we want like Laura Croft. And I was like, oh, she's a fictional character. She's really cool, but she's fictional. And I started meeting these women, and I started writing their stories. And it was everything from volcanologists to mountain climbers to women who worked in national parks, park rangers, like, you name it. I got to meet these women. I got to hang out with them. And I was like, holy moly, your story is awesome. More people should know about this. So I think because my career is in the media and the spotlight, like, I get to be kind of a poster child for this. But the reality is that surrounding me, far, far ahead of me, and everywhere around me are these incredible women in the world doing these amazing things and working in STEM and climbing mountains and doing phenomenal things. And you just don't hear about them as much, but that's changing. And that's really awesome.
Yeah. I was thinking about this woman that I interviewed who wrote this book called Philosophers Abroad, and it's the intersection of global explorers and philosophy, and how early explorers and women in philosophy were treated similarly in this realm of science and discovery. And looking at explorers like Isabella Bird, or people like you said, it's not that you're the first, it's just that these stories just haven't been the dominant stories. They haven't been the stories that for some reason media has deemed interesting or as important to tell. And so I love that you also created a space to really shine a light on who else is out there that is doing impactful work, and who are brave adventurers and explorers. I also love that, you mentioned when you got to Hollywood, people were like, oh, here, red carpet, this is for you. You're probably also going to love this story. I think it would have been easy for, and I talk about this a lot on the entrepreneurial journey as well, to just say yes, because you're like, well, that's a job. And oh my gosh, it's the red carpet. Of course I'm going to say yes, right? I would be crazy to say no. But to be able to listen to your internal compass that is saying like, not so much. Was your compass always that strong? Did you have to develop that skill, or where did that land for you?
Well, you're right in the sense that when you're young and you first come to the city, pretty much any job someone offers you, you're like, "Oh, I get to work. This is so great." But I remember doing this series called E-Travelers, and this was now like 22 years ago. And it was not paid, and we went to Hawaii, and it was a pilot for Travel Channel, and it was a real novel idea, and it was about like, look, all these amazing things you can find on the internet. And it was super cute, and I did that and thought, oh, this is the direction I want to go, because I had done the red carpet and I did shows about everything. I did shows about cars. I did shows about red carpets. I did like a show that was kind of like talk soupy, and that was fun. Like I always liked comedy and I liked humor, it always pushed me in the direction of something that's outdoors and something that inspires people to get there. That's what I love the most. I was a kid that grew up watching the old Jacques Cousteau stories, and I still do. I fall asleep to them on YouTube. I watched National Geographic like that. When I first worked with National Geographic and I had my photo taken in the yellow rectangle, I cried because this was something I'd always dreamed about. So all those jobs in and of themselves were fun. The red carpet jobs. Oh, it's cool. I'm on the red carpet and I intern at Entertainment Tonight, and I got to go to all these premieres and talk to creatives, and that wasn't boring. It's just that internal compass, I think it was always there, to answer your question, but it started to develop because I got to see the things that were cool, but maybe not exactly where I wanted to go. And then when I did get the chance to do something like E-Travelers, I was like, oh, this feels good. Like, you want me to go scuba diving and horseback riding, and you want to put me in a micropowered hang glider? Well, that sounds amazing. And that